Hello, this is Jason Matthews. I'm a retired law enforcement officer, and today I'm going to reveal to you the 3 major ways drugs get into prisons. Now, most of the general public does not understand how this works, and you may or may not want to stay to the end of the video to hear number 3 because it's pretty gross and it's pretty disgusting. So it's up to you whether you want to hear that or not. I was a correctional officer in maximum security at the beginning of my career. Now, some of this information may have changed, and if it has, comment down below and let me know if it has, if you are a current correctional officer, but I highly doubt that much has changed. There may be some minor details that have, but history repeats itself over and over again. Let's get started. The first major way that drugs get into prisons are by staff members. And what I mean by staff members, that could be secretaries, human resources people, doctors, lawyers, dentists, volunteers who volunteer in the prison, or correctional officers themselves. With correctional officers, I saw in my time in corrections, correctional officers get walked out of the prison and fired. So walked out means the FBI, in my case, in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the FBI would come into the prison and walk those correctional officers who were federal law enforcement out of the prison. And in some cases, they were charged, but at the very least, they were fired and let go from their jobs. And they had that mark on their employment. So they were corrupted by inmates. Normally how this works is inmates will promise them something in return for bringing drugs into the prison, whether it be money on the outside, whether it be favors of some sort, sexual favors on the outside. There's some type of benefit that they're offering to correctional officers, and it never works out in the end. But as human beings, we are corruptible. And so it takes someone with a lot of strength and discipline and morals and standards to not be corrupted. Thankfully, this is pretty rare. This is probably 1% of correctional officers among the thousands and thousands that are employed in the United States. I worked in a male maximum security prison, and there were some females, not many, but there were some females who were correctional officers in that facility, in that prison. And I saw a couple got corrupted and were bringing in drugs because they were in love with these inmates. Me personally, I would not have female staff members, especially correctional officers, working in a male prison. I believe that there should be female correctional officers working in female prisons and male correctional officers working in male prisons. That will eliminate part of the problem. And so these correctional officers, these female correctional officers, thought they were in love with these inmates and they were bringing drugs in to satisfy their needs. In the case of other staff members like the doctors and the dentists and the human resources who work inside the prison also, same thing applies. They're around the inmates and they're actually easier to corrupt because they're not law enforcement. They're not correctional officers with security clearances and background checks. Now, they do in some cases have background checks, but they're not as thorough, generally speaking, as the correctional officer. And inmates, these are professional criminals. They can talk a good game. They are very convincing. I was never even close to being corrupted in maximum security when I worked in prison, just because I have very, very high standards of myself and morals and values. But not all people are like that, especially these staff members. There's a higher percentage of them being corrupted. So they will be promised certain things, or they will have some sob story about how they need drugs because they feel bad, their mental health, whatever the case may be, it happens. Drugs come in through these staff members. Another major way drugs get into prisons is they are thrown or delivered into the prison. When I was a correctional officer working on mobile patrol outside the prison, so you're in a vehicle just like a police officer, a law enforcement officer, roaming around that reservation that the prison is sitting on, looking for people who possibly could be a threat to that perimeter. And so you do traffic stops just like you would in street law enforcement. And you're doing traffic stops, confiscating contraband, arresting people and such. Because many times you'll see as a correctional officer on mobile patrol, rotating around that perimeter suspicious vehicles. And what those suspicious vehicles could be doing in many cases is throwing drugs over the fence to the yard of where the prisoners are. Another way that I've heard, now this was not an issue when I was a correctional officer, but drones are now very popular. And drones can be flown over the prison with drugs and dropped in the prison. That's why there's towers around the prison to look out for such things. But things happen. Nothing is foolproof. People from the outside are throwing drugs over those fences or delivering them by drone. And then the inmates find them and they pick them up and they're in the prison population. Now, the third way is pretty graphic in many cases. Let me explain. Visitors, when they're visiting inmates, family members, friends, and such, when they come into the prison, they bring drugs into the inmates. Now, they are searched and they are put through metal detectors, generally speaking, before they go into the prison. However, there is a way around this. And this is a pretty extreme and gross way, but it happens on a regular basis. When I was a correctional officer, this was an ongoing problem. And the way they get around these drug detectors and these metal detectors and equipment that would detect such drugs, and you can tune out now if you don't want to hear it. But for example, a woman on the outside, before she plans to go in and visit the inmate at the prison, she or someone else, probably someone else, because that woman does not want to touch the drugs, because then she'll have drug residue, which can be detected on her hands. Usually they'll have someone put drugs inside of a balloon, a small balloon, or many, many different drugs, kinds and different weights, into a small balloon or in many balloons. They will stuff them into the woman's vagina who is going to go visit the inmate. She will pass the drug detection facilities going into the prison because they're inside of her. Once she's into the visiting room, she will go into the restroom of the visiting room. She will retrieve the drugs, the balloons which are holding the drugs in her vagina. She will put them in her mouth. She will hold them in her mouth. And then the inmate and the visitor are allowed one kiss, usually in a maximum security, in the visiting room when they first meet. And so when she comes out of the restroom, she has the drugs or the balloons in her mouth. She kisses the inmate. She transfers the balloons from her mouth into the inmate's mouth, and the inmate swallows that. Inmate swallows those balloons, swallows those drugs. Then the visit normally proceeds as usual, and then after the visit, the inmate goes back to their cell. And then within several hours or days, they will normally pass those as they would pass food. And so they come out naturally through their anus, and that's how they get the drugs. It gets even grosser than that, because I saw several times where inmates, they were under suspicion. And so what had happened was they were put into observation. What is observation? They are put in a cell where a correctional officer is watching them 24 hours a day because they suspected that they brought drugs in and they swallowed them. And if they don't want to get caught, what will happen is at some point, those balloons, those drugs have to come out of their anus. And so I've seen and heard of several times inmates, when it comes out of their anus, if they don't want to get caught, they try to retrieve them again after they come out of their anus, and they swallow them again. And hopefully, from their point of view, they're not detected. And so this is something that inmates will do that is very extreme. And most of the public doesn't know that. Inmates are desperate, and they will do anything to get drugs into the prison, because not only is it profitable, but they need it many times. And can you get anything into a prison? Pretty much anything, yes. You can pretty much get any type of drug into the prison. You name the drug, you can get it into a prison. I saw a video several years ago where some inmate was saying, no, there's no inmates on steroids in prison. Like, steroids don't exist in prison. Trust me, steroids do exist in prison. You can get any drug you want in prison. It's just a matter of how much do you want to pay for it and to what lengths do you want to go to try and get it. If you have any comments and you disagree with me, or you have updates on what's going on in prison these days, let me know down in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to be notified when new videos are released. Take care. Have a great day. And there's going to be many more videos describing my experience in prison, including gangs, race, and such, because I released a video recently entitled, "Are Correctional Officers Law Enforcement Officers?" Go watch that video if you haven't watched it. But it was a pretty well-received video, and I enjoy talking about this type of thing. My time in prison and maximum security was one of the best times in law enforcement that I had. There was always something going on. There was always action happening, more than on the streets when I was law enforcement. See you in the next video.